Welcome back to Face the Nation. We want to continue our conversation with Seattle Police Chief Carmen Best. Chief, thank you for staying with us. There's a lot of focus on your city. Republican lawmakers have called this 6-block area that the police had left and that protesters are occupying. They're saying it's like a war zone, that warlords are running rampant. The president himself has said domestic terrorists have taken it over. You're the police chief. What is happening in this so-called Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone?
Well, there are people who have occupied the area. My understanding is they've actually changed the name to the Capitol Hill Occupied Protest area. There are a lot of folks there, a lot of differing objectives and agendas and people who have congregated into the area. One of our real challenges there is trying to determine who is a leader or an influencer that seems to change daily. I know that many of our city officials and others are trying to establish some sort of communication with someone who can give us some direction about what the intent is and how we might move forward.
So I had read reports in the Wall Street Journal and elsewhere that there were negotiations underway with Black Lives Matter who were saying they didn't want to hand over control until funding to the police was cut. You're saying it's actually not that clear of a negotiation. How long will this last?
Yeah, those are great questions. I wish I had the answer to how long it might last. I can tell you that we want to move it forward as quickly and efficiently as possible. But my concern as a police chief, besides that I want to be back in our precinct doing the work, is that we don't want anyone there to be harmed. We don't want this to be something that devolves into a forced situation. So we're really trying to take a methodical, practical approach to reach a resolution where everyone gets out of here safely.
But you believe it's peaceful, just to be clear?
For the time being, yes,
Okay.
it is.
You are a police chief, and I just wonder, when you look at what has happened overnight in Atlanta, where this shooting occurred, the 2 officers involved are under scrutiny. One of them was fired. The police chief herself resigned, even though she was not present or overseeing this directly at that moment. And I wonder, given all the tension, what it is like to be a police chief right now. Do you feel like there is just zero room for any kind of error? And have you changed the way you're doing your job?
Well, certainly, I'm sure you're probably aware of the temporary restraining order that does not allow us to use pepper spray or gas, flashbangs or CS. So in some ways, that's already been a change that we're having to work through. I can tell you this, I was mentioning earlier that I was at the Black Lives Matter march, and I saw many people carrying signs about defunding the police, ending police brutality, and looking at resolving the qualified immunity issue. So I know, standing there watching and listening, that we're going to change in policing. We have to. It has to be a movement that involves everybody. We need to reimagine and refigure out, if you will, how we're going to move forward as a country and as an organization to make things better for everybody. It's incredibly difficult, but with every challenge, there's opportunity. There's opportunity to move forward and bring people together and get positive change. I absolutely believe that. So some stressful situations are not going to deviate me or my organization from leading the way and trying to make things better for all of us.
Well, Chief, good luck. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
We turn now to more news this week on the coronavirus crisis. Former FDA Commissioner Dr. Scott Gottlieb joins us from Westport, Connecticut. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
Can you set us straight here? The CDC said this week that expanded testing is what accounts for this increase that we're seeing in COVID-19 rates, and that hospitalizations nationally are going down. But then Dr. Anthony Fauci publicly said that what's happening is, quote, something obviously that's disturbing. Who is right? What's going on?
Well, hospitalizations nationally are flat. They're not going down, they're flat when you look at the total hospitalizations across the entire United States. And what we're seeing is that parts of the country that had persistent spread, that never really crushed their epidemic, now have flare-ups in the cases, surging cases as they reopen. That was expected, but the challenge is that parts of the country, states like Texas, Florida, Georgia, North Carolina, South Carolina, where you see those outbreaks right now, never really reduced the number of cases substantially. They had spread, it was persistent, and now it's flaring up. So in Arizona, you see 1,500 cases recorded recently. In Florida, 2,600. California, 3,700. To put that in perspective, at its peak of the epidemic in New York City, there were 5,000 cases a day recorded. Now, granted, we weren't diagnosing as high of a percentage of cases, but these are pretty big outbreaks right now underway in these parts of the country. And what you also see is the positivity rate going up. The percentage of people who are testing positive is increasing. So that's a bad combination. Seeing cases go up and seeing the positivity rate also increase suggests that there are outbreaks underway.
Do we know enough at this point to attribute the uptick to the reopening?
Well, it's certainly attributed to the reopening. I mean, we all expected that as we reopened, we were going to see an uptick in cases. So in some respects, we shouldn't be surprised by this. I think the challenge for these states and these cities, if you look at Texas, the outbreak is really centered around Houston and Austin. The challenge is that they aren't able to trace it back to a certain set of sources or activities, so they can't take targeted measures. What we're going to have to do going forward is take targeted mitigation steps to try to contain these outbreaks by perhaps closing certain venues. If you find that bars are the source of the spread, you might temporarily close bars or limit the number of people who can be in. Or if you find that certain large gatherings, outdoor gatherings, are the source of the spread, you might target those kinds of gatherings. Right now, we haven't been able to trace them back to the source because we don't have all that track and trace work in place. And so that's a challenge for public health officials. In the state of Arizona, that's largely left to local officials, to the counties. You might see the state start to take that over if they can't start to trace these cases, these surging cases, back to the sources.
You also have large demonstrations and now Trump political rallies that are being planned. You had Dr. Birx from the task force tell governors this week that shouting can actually offset the benefit of wearing a mask. That's obviously relevant to anyone going to a rally or to a demonstration. Do you agree with her?
Well, look, I agree with her. We've seen data now from the CDC that shows choir groups and places where people were singing led to spread within confined spaces. Obviously, the risk is a little bit diminished when you're outside versus indoors, but we know these large gatherings are going to lead to more spread. The spontaneous protests around the country are going to lead to additional spread. Certainly holding a large political rally will as well. That's in an indoor space. It's a confined space. And so we need to be mindful of this. I mean, there's things you can do to reduce the risk. You can require people to wear masks. With respect to the protests, it's a shared responsibility, not just of the people attending those protests to try to wear masks and engage in good practices, but also the police tactics, which probably contributed to the spread. The spraying of tear gas, grouping people together. This is a shared responsibility to try to reduce the risk in these settings.
You worked in the Trump administration. I know you know how important to the president having his political rallies is, but you're a doctor. Is it advisable for him to be going to these places where there are upticks and holding rallies? Would you go?
Well, look, I would certainly counsel against it. If I was giving advice to the administration on this, I would say that they should withhold large political rallies right now. They also need to lead by example. And so encouraging people to social distance, encouraging people to wear masks, that's what we should be engaging in right now. And that political example is a powerful message to individual people all across the country. We're taking an awful lot of infection into the fall. We think that we can sort of manage at 20,000 diagnosed infections a day. The virus wants to infect 50 to 60% of us. That's the characteristics of this virus. It's not going to be content just to infect 20,000 people a day. And so if we carry all this infection all the way into the fall, it's unlikely we're going to be able to keep it at these kinds of levels. And we need to be mindful of that.
The CDC says masks should be worn at all times. They issued this on Friday with an eye towards some of these gatherings. You recently have changed your recommendation on the type of mask that people should be wearing. What are you advising?
Well, look, we know the better the quality of the mask, the more protective it's going to be to the individual. There's a study in Lancet that showed that N95 masks are 96% effective versus surgical masks, which were only 67% effective. And we've seen that healthcare workers that didn't wear N95 masks had a higher rate of infection. And so ideally, we want to be providing high-quality masks to individuals. Any mask is better than no mask. A good cloth mask is going to provide a level of protection, but not as much as an N95. And there's enough supply entering the market right now that in 3-4 months, we should be able to provide N95 masks, at the very least, to high-risk individuals. I think we need to look at ways to try to get higher quality masks into the hands of senior citizens, people who are immunocompromised or at higher risk of infection. Right now, the states are stockpiling these masks, and so is the federal government. California just purchased 150 million with an order to purchase another 250 million. So as the states fill their stockpiles and hospitals do, I think in 3 or 4 months, we're going to be in a position to start providing these to consumers. Right now, consumers can go out and get them. They're expensive. They're harder to get, but they're starting to become available in the commercial channel for consumers.
An important change. Thank you very much, Dr. Gottlieb. We'll be right back. Last week, Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell warned that the country and the world was experiencing the, quote, biggest economic shock in living memory. He predicted lingering high unemployment and that a significant number of Americans won't go back to their old jobs. Robert Kaplan is head of the Dallas Federal Reserve, one of the 12 banks that make up that system. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Margaret.
Houston is a hot spot, as we just heard. Saturday marked Texas's highest COVID hospitalization rate since this pandemic began. The governor is continuing to reopen businesses. Elsewhere in the West, out in Arizona, also seeing some hot spots, flare-ups. Governor's not requiring people to wear masks. As an economist, what do you make of these policy choices? Is it going to impact the economic rebound?
Yeah, so we knew as part of the reopening that we would get more cases. The thing we're watching are there so many cases that has the risk of overwhelming the healthcare system? We're not seeing that at all here, but I think what you point out is that the healthcare response at this point is as important as fiscal or monetary policy. And in particular, it's critical, based on my conversations with epidemiologists, that people widely wear masks, that we have good testing and contact tracing. And I think the extent we do that well will determine how quickly we recover. We'll grow faster if we do those things well. And right now, it's relatively uneven.
So that is a false choice, the dichotomy between reopening and being able to follow these policy prescriptions. I think that's an important point you made.
That's right. That is exactly what I'm saying.
Do you still believe that the national unemployment rate will tick up to 20%? Because we've seen this change in the past few weeks.
No, we're on our way down right now. So there's some dispute about some of the data. But let's say the national unemployment rate right now, if you did it accurately, we think is in the mid-teens. The other measures suggest there's even more slack. We're going to get positive job growth in June, July, and from here. The issue we have, and I think the chairman talked about a few days ago, is if we're even with that growth, we're going to end the year with an elevated unemployment rate. And that depending on how fast the service sector comes back and people reengage, we're still going to have an elevated level of unemployment, maybe as high, based on my forecast, of 8% or more. And it means that some people won't be able to go back to their old jobs and will have to find new jobs. And this is why skill training, helping people find new jobs is going to be also a big part of this effort.
If Congress doesn't renew provisions like the federal moratorium on evictions, if they don't include the $600 boost to unemployment when it all expires in July, what will be the impact?
So fiscal policy, and we said this, is going to be very important from here. Monetary policy has a key role to play, and we're doing everything we can, but we don't make grants at the Fed. It's going to take continued, I think, unemployment benefits. Now, they might be restructured to create more incentives for people to go back to work. That'll make sense. I think benefits to state and local governments. Fiscal policy from here is going to be a critical element of the recovery.
And by that, you mean you're telling Congress that they have to do some work here. I want to.
I'm being careful as a central banker not to tell the fiscal authorities what to do.
I know you are. I know you are.
But I would say fiscal policy is going to be critical from here.
I know why you're using the language you are. I was just trying to help our audience understand there.
Yes.
One of your regional Fed presidents from Atlanta, Raphael Bostic, wrote this week that, quote, systemic racism is a yoke that drags on the American economy. This country has both a moral and economic imperative to end these unjust and destructive practices. I wonder if you would agree and how you would quantify the cost of the racism he's talking about.
I would agree. You know, going into the crisis, we had made a big point and have been working for years at the Dallas Fed, but across our Federal Reserve System to help improve skills training, to improve educational attainment, because we strongly believe a more inclusive economy will lead to better growth. For years, blacks and Hispanics have had an elevated level of unemployment versus whites. That started to improve dramatically in the last few years. We've now taken a step back as a result of this crisis, but a more inclusive economy where everyone has opportunity will mean faster workforce growth, faster productivity growth, and we'll grow faster. And so I think we're right to focus on this and bore in on this. It's in the interest of the U.S. The fastest growing demographic groups in this country are blacks and Hispanics. If they don't participate equally, then we're going to grow more slowly.
And more work needs to be done on that front by Congress?
No question.
I think that's what you're saying. All right, thank you very much, Robert Kaplan of the Dallas Fed, for giving us your insight. And we'll be back in a moment to talk about politics and presidents with our own John Dickerson. We go now to a familiar face on this broadcast, former Face the Nation moderator and now 60 Minutes correspondent John Dickerson. He's the author of a new book that's coming out on Tuesday. It's called The Hardest Job in the World, The American Presidency. John, good to have you here.
Great to be back, Margaret. Great to see you.
So you say the American presidency is in trouble, it's overburdened, misunderstood, and an almost impossible job to do. And you started writing this before the pandemic, before the economic crisis, and before the current racial strife that we are in. I mean, we seem to be beyond the cliche of this is a stress test on our democracy. How are you thinking of where we are?
Well, that's exactly right. I mean, the book was finished before those three challenges, but they highlight a central point of the book, which is I went back and tried to look at the blueprint of the office. What is it really at its most basic level? And what it is a job where big, high-stakes things happen that are surprises to the president and where everybody, the president on down, needs to have created a system for dealing with those kinds of emergencies so they can be ready when the crisis hits. Because when the crisis hits, it's too late to kind of get ready on the fly. Gautam Mukunda is a professor at Harvard, and he says the presidency is like an airbag. You may not think about it all the time, but when there's an emergency, you want it to work.
So the excuse, well, no one could have seen this coming, you're saying the office is designed with that assumption that you need to be prepared for the thing you don't see coming.
That's right. That's why LBJ referred to the office, pardon me, morning viewers, as like being a jackass in a hailstorm, because sometimes you just have to take it. And what that means is the job holds you to an extremely high standard. And the reason it's important to take responsibility, even for something that you didn't create, is because that sets everybody's priorities. It tells everybody on your political team, you know what, spinning won't work. I've put my reputation on the line here. The buck stops with me. And you better all solve this problem because my future is at stake if we don't deliver results. And don't put any energy into spinning this. And that's why the office is so hard. It's why we treat it with such reverence and seriousness, because you're in a position where the buck stops with you.
But as you write in the book, President Trump has sort of changed that or challenged that assumption when he says things like, no, I don't take responsibility for anything with this pandemic.
He has, and in fact, that's why he was elevated to the office, because people looked at this office in which we ask a president to do too much and with tools that are either broken or which he wasn't given in the first place. A lot of what the president's been asked to do for the last several presidencies really is better housed in Congress or with governors or with mayors. But we asked the president to do it because we run everything through the presidency, which is why I wanted to take a look at what the office actually should do. President Trump was brought in by people said, dismantle lots of it. Don't pay attention to a lot of these rules and norms. And so he is both someone to evaluate, but also because of that behavior, he's an incredible measuring instrument for us to take a look at the office and say, well, do we want this? Do we not want that? And what should we replace it with?
Well, we are 5 months out from this election, and I wonder, given all the stresses, how you're thinking of the actual process, because it feels like the institutions are undergoing some real crisis in confidence from the public. And just the functioning, the mechanics of our democracy are being called into question, being able to vote in November. How are you thinking of this?
Well, exactly. Let's start on the voting in November. One of the key things for a president, for any national conversation, and again, we run them all through the presidency, which isn't always great, but if we look at the next election, this is one of those problems. It's on the horizon. It is not yet in our lap. The administration and different agencies have been looking at the elections because they're worried about them being interfered with by the Russians or the Chinese. Now we have another problem with COVID-19. This is a problem everybody can see coming, and that's a test of leadership. Can you focus on the things that are important but not urgent? Because even though they may not be urgent today, election day is not today, they will be urgent soon enough. And when they become urgent, you can't suddenly come up with a solution. So this is, in addition to the other three tests we have, which is the economy, COVID, and America's racial profile at the moment, we have this fourth test coming, which is, can there be a peaceful transfer of power or a maintenance of power with the incumbent, which makes all people who are on the other side of the issue, which is to say those people who would not like Donald Trump to be reelected, make them feel like the process was safe. That is the hallmark of American democracy. It was the thing the country was founded on, that we could have peaceful transfers of power with no monkey business. That's a big test facing this country.
You know, the president has talked about his generals and his relationship with the military. And I remember in 2016, one of the things President Obama was faulted for was his frayed relationship with the military. This week, we had this extraordinary moment where the president's top military advisor, Mark Milley, the chairman of Joint Chiefs of Staff, go on camera and issue an apology for wearing his fatigues and standing alongside the president in this photo op in Lafayette Square. Have you seen, you know, a fraying of the relationship on that front? Is that claim gone?
Well, you know, what I focus on is the early lines in the president's speech at West Point. He said he was there on behalf of the nation. And that's where the fraying takes place, because General Milley was worried that he was brought to Lafayette Square on behalf of the Trump reelection campaign. The president has a duty to represent the entire nation, and the military takes that very seriously, and that's where some of the fraying has gone. Also, of course, the president's been very tough on some of his generals about the way they've prosecuted some of America's recent wars.
John Dickerson, it's an interesting read. Thank you so much. Great to have you here. We'll be right back. That's it for all of us today. Thank you for watching. Until next week, for Face the Nation, I'm Margaret Brennan.